I'm going to talk a little bit today about African manhood in the diaspora, even though I see on your announcement the lecture was sort of tentatively titled Black on Black Violence. That's okay because we'd expected by this time to have my new publication, Black on Black Violence, and we sort of anticipate perhaps talking about it today. So you can see here it's Black on Black Violence, the psychodynamics of Black self-annihilation in service of white domination. We're waiting on the books to be delivered. Hopefully they will be delivered tomorrow or by Tuesday, and they'll be in your local store before the end of the week. So we hope you'll be able to pick them up and sort of let us know what you think about the book. As you can see, though, we're concerned with Black on Black violence, but we're concerned with it in terms of the political context in which it occurs, as you can tell from the subtitle. We see Black on Black violence as a form of Black self-annihilation, as in service to white domination. We have to look beyond the mere idea that so-called criminality and violence in the Black community is a result of crack. You know, people are motivated to take crack and to smoke crack and to engage in the selling of crack and into all of the activities related to crack. And of course, there was violence in our communities prior to the crack epidemic. So we cannot blame that violence merely on the existence of crack. We must though recognize that criminal behavior, Black on Black violence, represents a form of social relationship. It isn't often, you see, we think of criminal behavior as social relationship, but it is. A person chooses to relate to another person in a particular sort of way, in a way that leads to violence being committed against one or both of those individuals. That commitment of violence in that social interaction is the result of social attitudes, the results of prior learning, the results of miseducation, and other social and political factors. So in order to understand what motivates Black on Black violence, we have to understand the social system in which that violence occurs. If we are talking about our children or mugging other children for sneakers or for jackets and so forth, we must recognize that the fact that they are mugging each other, hurting each other for those jackets, for sneakers and so forth, must occur within a social system where these things are produced. So in effect, the crime is still a social, political, economic product. And consequently, we have to study the economics of criminality. The general system would make us think then that criminal behavior, Black on Black violence, violence in general, is the result of some criminal tendency in the individual, that somehow the criminal is greatly different from the rest of the people in the population, that there are some types of twisted values. We try to illustrate then in this particular text how those things that motivate Black on Black violence and criminality are continuous with standard everyday values. As a matter of fact, the Black on Black violent criminal is very much what I call a bourgeois criminal. The things he's attacking people for are the same things that the good old Black middle class struggles so hard for. Not different. It's a difference only in technique and approach. But it indicates, though, that there's a sharing of values between what we call our Black on Black criminals and what we call our normal law-abiding people. As a matter of fact, I try to demonstrate in here that it is a very law-abidingness of Black people that sets this thing up. and our failure to come to terms with what law is and where it comes from, and why laws are instituted, and how laws themselves are the major contributors to criminality and are a major part of the problem. So in order to begin to change this situation that confronts us today with the murder of our children on the streets and so forth, and the destruction of our communities, we have to upgrade our understanding of the motivations that moves our people to attack one another and to destroy one another. This book, of course, it's in line with the other books I've written, The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child, with the one that I am going to hopefully have published around February, the working title being On the Education of Black Children, where I will do an extensive analysis of some of the issues dealing with education of our children and how our children are set up through the kind of educational system that we have today, which is really not an educational system, but a miseducation system. And how we must come to terms and begin at the beginning that we are operating in an oppressive system. And you know, that sounds like old hat to a lot of us. And many of us, you know, we want to say, wow, you know, that's 60s talk, we've heard it before. We really have not heard it before in order for us to be in the condition we're in as people. You know, there's hearing and there's listening. And a lot of us have heard it perhaps, but a lot of us have not listened. And when I talk about listening, I'm talking about listening in the sense that after hearing one moves forward. And so we are still talking about the things we were talking about in the 60s. It's because somewhere we are not listening to what is going on. And often we take superficial sameness to mean sameness in terms of depth. We must again look at this oppressive situation, because often when I go to educational conferences and so forth, I see people diving directly into the discussion of the education of our children without discussing the context in which that education takes place. You are going to waste tremendous amounts of time and destroy your children if you don't look at the context in which a phenomenon occurs. And this happens all too often. We talked about, some of you might have heard me on the Lord Trade One show here a few weeks ago, when we started to talk about why our children have problems in mathematics. And I'll appear on the show again on the 3rd of December. And I made the generalization that in a sense, our children have problems in mathematics because they must have problems in mathematics. You know, it's not merely a matter of whether they're able to learn math, or whether they have the motivation to learn math, and all the things we're talking about. You have to look at what would the learning of mathematics mean to European domination? What would the learning of technological thinking mean to the hegemony of the white man on this earth today? What would the establishment of black research laboratories, the entry of African nations into the space race for real, the manufacture of African people of technological systems and so forth mean economically, politically, and militarily to Europeans? You have to start with that first. If you don't start with that first, you miss the whole point of the deal. You see? If then our technological expertise and abundance and so forth is a threat to European dominance, then it should not come as a surprise to you that in a school designed by Europeans for Europeans, black children would have their largest numbers of problems around the technological areas. It's there where you start before you get into the motivational systems of the students. Because you will recognize that once that system sees our technological advancement as inimical to their dominance, they are going to organize the motivational system of the youth so that it would appear that they voluntarily avoid mathematics, science, and technological thinking. And they're going to organize that motivational system so that almost in no way will you be able to teach them mathematics in the deep sense, and you can concentrate on one technique after another, and you'll end up with the same problem, which is one of the reasons why people are so frustrated today. Every year there's a new technique, a new approach that's going to magically, get our children to read, or magically get them to write, or this and that, and of course you find yourself the next year asking about what happened to this program that had such great promise. When you start there and work that through in depth, and it's not enough just to say it. They want us to fail, because it keeps them in power. That's the first statement. Then, of course, you got to go in how the failure is created, psychologically, socially, economically, politically, and so forth, and get into the fine points of the organization of the African psyche so that it can maintain European dominance. After you work that, then of course you get into what is our definition of education. Too many of us enter into these discussions not having defined our basic terms, using the words of the Europeans. Those words have a history to them. Words are not mere means of communications, ladies and gentlemen. Words have histories. Words represent political experiences. Words represent political, military, economic intentions. You see, words are the organizers of thinking and behavior. They're not mere means of just sharing ideas, not by a long shot. Words are the means by which people manipulate each other's consciousness, and through the manipulation of their consciousness, their behavior, their vision, their perception, the way they relate one to the other. That's why you have to have a very sound knowledge of words. Some people who've reviewed this book are already talking to me about the words in here. Well, you're going to have to wrestle with them a little bit. It's all right. We've got to wrestle with words. We're victimized by an absence of knowledge of words, of word power. We've got to move beyond the linguistic level at which we operate now as people. A great part of the oppression of our people occurs at the point of word usage. And we have to be able to recognize how language is used so that we'll learn how to use it as a tool and a weapon against those who would dominate us as such. Later on, I hope to do a book, of course, on the health of our people from the psychosomatic point of view. Again, a further extension of this topic, because black on black violence, of course, is bad for our health, obviously. And in a sense, it is a part of our killing ourselves for white folk, you see. When you let people dominate you mentally and spiritually and psychologically, they implant a spirit in you. And of course, they implant that spirit so that that spirit can take over your body and your desires and your behaviors and your perceptions to carry out their wishes, you see. And in this book, I talk about desire, the very important thing of desire. You have to recognize that the whole white system is founded on African desire, you see. And I want you to look at that because I think it's very important. If we didn't desire certain things, the system could not last, you see. If we could learn to live without certain things, it could not last. But when we can't live without every piece of garbage and junk those people offer us, then of course we maintain the very system. I give an example here about the crack and how the whole crack establishment is based on what? Desire. the desire of the addict. You remove that desire for crack, and you remove the whole institutional setup. The whole arrangement is gone. And I talk about how that desire in the crack addict not only is a personal desire, but really is a form of organization of the total community. Do you see what the desire for crack does to a community? How it reorganizes the total community structure, how it reorganizes the way people relate one to another. Look at how a family becomes reorganized on the basis of a desire for crack. You see? And so a desire is not merely an individual thing. It's not merely a wish to fulfill a craving on the part of the individual, not at all. We relate to other people in terms of our desires, you see. And therefore, when you let other people manufacture for you, and in manufacturing, manufacture desires, they also manufacture then the organization of your social relations and the whole system of relations that you have one to the other. And so we have to look at how we've come to desire. So the demon, the spirit is implanted in us so that the things we desire are the very things that supports the total system. And that comes in the forms of word, language, and other kind of things, which is the reason why we have to analyze those things. When we then talk about health in this regard, if then whites have a death wish, and they do, toward black folk, and black folk then fill their heads with white-produced desires, concepts, words, and so forth, then we as people will get sick and die for white folk. And you can see us dying in many forms. Black on black violence is one of them. Poor health habit is another. All kinds of psychosomatic diseases, high blood pressure, heart disease, many of the other diseases we talked about today are the result of the fact that we are carrying out the white death wish in our own personalities, even to the point of Saudi Arabia. And so you will see that the black health and so forth is supremely connected to the political structure. You must come to recognize that health is political. You see, and many of us are so miseducated in this system until we think of disease as merely a biological phenomenon. But disease is not. And of course, it's often taught in the school that way. You know, well, cancer is caused by, some kind of radiation or this and that. But stop a minute. Those people who live closer to these waste dumps, or live closer to the atomic plants, or live this way and that way, tend to get it more frequently. And therefore, a good way of reducing the disease is to do what? Move the people. However, the people are there because of political and what? Power differences. You see, so the disease is not only the result of a biological syndrome working its way out through the body, it is primarily often a result of a political, economic syndrome working its way through the body politic. You see? And so it is not enough for us to merely understand the biological mechanisms of disease, but we must come to understand the political, social, and economic mechanisms of disease, you see. So you can begin to see where an Afrocentric education and African-centered education is so different from what we're getting today. It's not just preparing for jobs and skills and that kind of nonsense. It's about life and surviving and overthrowing and being liberated as a people. Because I tell you, you could die with these skills. The accumulation by black people of mere knowledge and the accumulation by African people of mere skills in no way provides protection for us as a people. It's not going to do it. The young man here who made an announcement introduced a very, very important concept, and that's that concept of a nation within a nation. And if you're not discussing a nation within a nation, if you're not thinking of yourself as a people separate and distinct in this country and operate as such, you are wasting your time accumulating knowledge and information. You're going to die black and proud. Yes, it's not enough to become Afrocentric in your knowledge. And it's not enough to collect skills. Skills and knowledge must be organized under the general purpose of the people themselves. The rest, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The working of whites in this country, even though they may see they're going to their jobs as individual activities, the sum total of those individual activities represents the strength of this nation. They represent its capacity to militarily defend them against their enemy. They're going to work with their skills represents the power of this nation to dominate in the world. They may think that they're personal, that they're just going for their own personal reason, but because they have a nation and their going to work is subsumed under national goals, and their very jobs actually are created or phased in and out based on national policy. These jobs just don't occur simply because somebody happens to want to hire you. The very nation itself, through tax policies, through political policies, through subsidizing certain industries, through grants and other things, transforms occupational levels. And it will, and you will see then the state or the nation transforming occupations dependent upon what its enemies are doing. Some of you were here when the Russians sent up the Sputnik, and it frightened this country. Thank you. Right away, the Congress went into action and created the student defense loan, or whatever they called it. In other words, then, they put money into those people who go this way and that way to restructure. Now, those people, they went to college, they got jobs, and maybe they didn't even know the history of how those jobs came into being. But in following through those jobs, and even in thinking in personal terms, they actually moved the nation forward and kept the nation powerful, you see. But a group of African people who are merely qualified for jobs, who have mere knowledge, but who do not operate within the context of a nation, are just a bunch of individuals who, with all their knowledge and all of their experience and skills, cannot defend themselves against their enemy and can be wiped out and destroyed. So you see, education and so forth has to move far beyond the concept of mere accumulation of knowledge, or even beyond the concept of African history. It's got to be welded into peoplehood, or else it is incomplete. And this is a part of the thing that we must work toward. I'm going to talk a little bit then today about African manhood within the diaspora here. An issue I know that bothers some people, and particularly those feminists who have gotten their signs from the white feminists, and who've let white feminism infiltrate their minds and have not examined it very closely. And it's almost become unpopular to talk about what it means to be a man, and to, deal with the concept of manhood. You got to deal with it. You can't get around it. And of course, I will mention that infamous book in a minute. That also deals with the concept of manhood. But let's look and see what's going on here. Let's look at a few headlines in relationship to my subject today. I'm looking now at the New York Times piece here of Sunday, September 30th, 1990. Starting on the first page there. Milwaukee creating 2 schools for black boys. We get a lot of comments about that concept, And I'll just read a couple of quotes here. The school board has voted to create 2 African-American immersion schools in a pilot program that seeks to emphasize Black culture, build self-esteem, and promote the rewards of responsible male behavior. So you can see why people start hollering and screaming, you know. Ladies and gentlemen, in order for us to be in the condition we're in, the Black male must be perceived as irresponsible, you see. And of course, part of the thing I talk about in this Black on Black violence, we have to look up what role do these men in jail serve in terms of maintaining European culture, you see. Why are these aggressive men being put in these places, you see? And it has all to do with the definition of what it means to be a man. Understand? Because an oppressor recognizes that it is far more likely that it is the male of the species who's going to resist domination and resist it violently. And any oppressor who's worth his salt knows that you must destroy the males. You must imprison them, humiliate them, and do any other kind of thing to them in order to hold the people down. And part of this so-called Black on Black violence is queued up with that. And one of the reasons our men are in jail is not because of any criminality of the Black man, but essentially the criminality of the white man. And we have to come to understand it. But the thing I'm getting here is it is centered around this concept of manhood, and we have to come to terms with it. And it goes on to say here, the Milwaukee plan, pushed by a group of Black educators and parents, represents the most dramatic educational approach aimed at saving the next generation of young Black men from the social maelstrom now devouring much of the current generation. This reminds me about the next generation of Black men and how they dragged out Kenneth Clark to rage impotently at what is going on. And I wish the brother a very nice, safe retirement. You know, it's time. He's earned it. Yes. 36 years of the philosophy of Kenneth Clark. 36 years. And what do we have to show for it? 36 years of assimilationism, integrationism, being taught by white folk, and this other kind of stuff. And then you drag the architect of that program out to try to deal with this issue. Let's see, what does he say here? For adults to impose this nonsense on children is academic child abuse. What the heck does he think has been happening to Black children since 1954? You know, it's amazing. It's outrageous. It's absurd. It's a continuation of the whole segregation nonsense. Told you years ago, ladies and gentlemen, integration has theoretically little to do with education. We tried to warn you that the NAACP was not about the education of Black children, it's about the integration of Black children. And those two things are not coterminous. You see, hopefully we've learned our lesson. And so we are seeing some reactions and changes to that. So anyway, here they're talking education's. Often what is not talked about here, of course, is the situation in Milwaukee. And stated here, it says, educators are familiar with the consequences of the dire circumstances. Nearly 1 in 4 Black American men in their 20s is in jail, on probation or parole, while 1 in 5 in that age group is in college. And I'm sure you're familiar with that statistic. 1/4 more of our males are in jail, on parole, or in some relationship with the so-called criminal justice system. Among Black males 18 to 34 years old, homicide is the leading cause of death. Men killing each other in the interest of white domination. This is what's going on. Fewer than 20% of black male students in Milwaukee schools maintain a C average or better. And this is a part of the crux of the issue. What do you do when literally you got 80% of the males basically what? Flunking. Only 20% making C or better. And it's the best thing that our so-called leadership can do is offer us more of the same old things that have not worked. These people are in a drastic set of circumstances, as we all are. And of course, they recognize that some heavy changes have to be made if we're going to get out of it. And it's too bad, you see, that we had to lose a generation or two of our people in order to learn this lesson, when the knowledge and the information and so forth was available to us right at that time. You see, which means again, you see, that we have to change our way of learning. We cannot afford to take 20 and 36 years to learn basic lessons, which is one of the reasons why, again, we have to use the language. That's one of the reasons language exists, so that the historical experience of a people can be passed on to the next generation without that generation having to go through the same experience that the prior generation went through. That's the essence of the teaching between grandmother and child, mother and child, teacher and student. The words, as I said earlier, represent the accumulated experience of a people. Why then don't you want black children to read so that the accumulated experience of black people and the accumulated experience of knowledgeable people cannot be passed on to them, so they'll make the same stumbling mistakes that have been made generation after generation after generation? That's why they have difficulty reading, ladies and gentlemen. So that they cannot break the codes of their enemies and see through those codes and learn rapidly and avoid the sacrifice of 2 and 3 and 4 generations of their people before they learn a lesson. You see, that's why we get to know the words. That's why we have to know the language, ladies and gentlemen. And this comes in, this absence of knowledge. I mean, the Kenneth Clark experiment itself had right in it the contradictions. But we were so caught up in our desire to be with white folk, thinking that it would solve all our problems. You solve all your problems by running into the arms of your enemies. That's very neat. And I can't understand. You know, people say, I don't want your children. I don't like your children. Take them anyhow. Just forcing them. It's an amazing situation we saw here in the 60s and 70s. Unbelievable. And we expect that to be forced our children on them, that they were going to educate them for us. And now what's wrong with our children? You know what's wrong with your children. Black boys accounted for 50% of all school suspensions here last year, although they represent less than 28% of the enrollment. Minority students made up more than 70% of the district's enrollment. And it goes on here, you see, in various other things about the education of males. Another quick look here from the Amsterdam News on the 13th of October, 1990, talking about the New York State correctional system, on a report put out by the Correctional Association of New York and the New York State Coalition for Criminal Justice, which noted that young African-American men over 23, and let's start at the beginning. Key findings in the study conducted by the Correctional Association of New York and the New York State Coalition for Criminal Justice note that young African-American men are over 23 times more likely to be jailed than white men. You see? And in the book Black on Black Violence, I talk about statistics. In fact, I have a chapter there I call Quantifying the Myth. You know, the arrest statistics, and the number of people in jail and what that means. And we deal with this because it has a psychological effect on people when they read statistics. They assume that the number of arrests indicates the level of criminality present in a people. So that the more people you have in jail, or the more people arrested, the more criminal they must be in their nature. And many of us are psyched out by that. And that's a myth. That's a pure fab, that's a myth. And we have to deal with that myth. The number of men in jail would represent the number of men who've been arrested. That's all it represents. In the pure sense of the word, you can be in jail without having committed a crime. Simply because you're in jail doesn't mean that you've committed a crime. Because you're in prison doesn't mean that you've committed a crime, or that you are a criminal in a deep sense. So it's a fallacious jump in logic to assume merely because our men outnumber the other groups in prison, they are also then more criminal. Of course, that's what the system wants to make you think. That's why it runs these statistics, you see, because it knows most people, having gone through this American miseducation system, you see, and they know our minds because they've trained them, will automatically jump and say, wow, these black men must really be criminal. So many of them in jail. No. So many are arrested. And why aren't there white men in the jails? Well, they must be less criminals. Is that right? Ladies and gentlemen, what did I tell you? What did I tell you all the time under oppression? That under oppression things must be turned backwards. They're always turned backwards. You understand? And this is the thing you have to recognize. In order for the system to be ruled, it must be ruled in terms of lies and deception. You don't have a minority population, a 10% minority population like Europeans ruling the world on the basis of truth and justice and honesty and the old American way. You don't have that. It has to be twisted around. And in order for the oppressed to comply with that system, the oppressed too must be what? Backwards. Yeah. Believe lies. Take lies for truth and truth for lies. You see? And we must understand that fundamental fact before you start getting into all the other stuff we talk about. Twist it around. So what do we have? The crooks and thieves outside and the victims in jail. Yeah. And the victims called crooks and thieves. And the one outside, the law-abiding citizens. This white man is the greatest thief and crook and killer and murderer the world has ever known. And for you to think that this white man is non-criminal and represents what it means to be law-abiding, you got to be out of your mind. You got to be crazy. And yet there are a lot of us who think that, you know. But you have to in order for the system to what? To work. To work. And that's one of the reasons why you have to educate your own children so that they won't fall victim to this kind of mythology. And the American mythology of science-tizing nonsense by covering it with what? Numbers. You see, because we live in this kind of culture, we tend to think that if something carries a number, you see, and of course psychology is famous for representing political theories behind statistics. And people think, getting so caught up in the mathematical operations, they think then because the mathematics balance out and checks out, that what is being talked about balances out and checks out. And they really did, oh well, hey, that's the 5%, whatever you call it there, you know, level of confidence. It's still a lie. You know, and that's one reason why psychologists are probably one of the most miseducated of professionals, because all that hocus pocus goes on, man. I mean, you spend time after time with mathematics and statistics again and again, and you still have to point out to people, hey, the math can check out very well. But it's still, what about the idea behind the math? You know, they're not intrinsically related, you see. So we see here, you know, it could mean that because there are fewer white men in jail, what? That other white men are what? Not arresting them. That's all. You know? And when you look at it, that's the way it works. When you really look at it and look at the deal, this is the way it goes. Black boys and teenagers, 7 times more likely to be arrested for the same crime as a white person. You must understand that the policeman is the law in the community, and the policeman carries discretion, you see, and makes a decision as to whether he will take someone in or leave someone alone, you see. And so with the policeman with a prejudiced attitude or a racist attitude, you're going to see the results of that racism. So if you had 7 white boys committing the same crime as 7 black boys, you'll see the 7 black boys in the jailhouse, and perhaps just 1 of the white boys in the jailhouse. And then you will say, well, you know, these boys are 7 times more criminal than black boys than the white boys. You can't do that. Look at what happened to the Jews over there in Brooklyn, right? Second time they've had a riot. The other time they even got into the station house and ripped it apart. Wounded 44 policemen. And yet, had you gone to that jail the next day, you would not have been able to count all of those Hasidics who were part of that attack. They would not have been in the statistics. And you would make the assumption then that they must be very law-abiding. These people even attack the law and the law enforcers. But if you go by statistics, you're gonna be misled. Oh, they must be law-abiding people, and you know they must be so self-behaving and so forth. And this is the game, and we get psyched out by the game, you see. And we must be careful then, not that. 1 in 4 here. So when we look at these statistics in terms of our males, that's why you got to look at it in terms of the political, social situation, or else you're going to misunderstand your own circumstance. It says that on a given day, the report continued, 1 in 4 African American men is under the control of New York's criminal justice system, 2 times more than all full-time black male college student enrollees in the state. The report, entitled Imprisoned Generation, noted that New York's jail population has gone from 12,500 in 1973 to more than 54,000 today. Reminds me of a thing I've told audiences before. You thought your problem was going to be solved by appointing more blacks to judgeships, didn't you? And I told you, the more black judges you get, the more your young men are going to jail. And the same thing is going to happen with police, too. The solution is not the appointing of black judges and police and the other. You got to go deeper than that, man. Much deeper than that. So now we've gotten mayors elected. We've gotten governors elected. And, you know, representatives elected, and I bet you there's a monotonic relationship between those numbers elected and the number of black men in jail. I talk about here again in this book what I call the American dilemma. How do you oppress the people and maintain their oppression and at the same time appear to be liberal and appear to be working in their interest? And you got to check that trick back out, because you're going to see then that the more our men and women are elevated to the jobs in the society, the more they're going to jail, the more that we're going to get AIDS, the more we're going to be homeless. Look at it. But you see, when we make you live vicariously, you know, through the success of others instead of your own, and so you're supposed to be happy when some guy makes a big salary, even though you're still starving to death. And when one guy gets a job and says, man, ain't we going a long way? We who? You know? Of course, they have put us in that kind of mentality, and so they know then one token is worth a million. You see? And while they got their eyes on the great successes, we're going to be mowing them down under the bottom. And by the time they realize what's going on, it's going to be over. And then we'll get the successes. Oh yeah, they're coming. They got their time coming. They're not going to be saved. They're honorary white men right now, but that's going to be revolt. This is what the Negro has failed to understand with this fairy tale leadership we have out here. You know, and they lived happily ever after. Little white boys and little white girls and little black boys and little black girls holding hands together. And they lived happily ever after. Who told you that, man? Regression takes place in history. People lose in history. History is not all about progressing. People go backwards in history. But that comes again from us buying the American mythology of progress. That things just have to do what? Get better. Nonsense. They can get worse. And they happen in historical time. And the idea then that you will reach a point where little black boys and white girls and all these people will be holding hands, doesn't mean that it's going to last forever. Not at all. You see? And yet, you know, many of our leaders leave us with this impression. Once we achieve this great, you know, race-mixed society, once we achieve the great classless society, once, you know, oh, it's going to go forever. We're in heaven then. Not at all. In fact, if you're deceived by that concept, you're going to be cut down right in the midst of what you think are your greatest accomplishments. And remember, the Jews were shot down and done in right at the point where they were integrating into German society. Yeah, where they thought they were really making it. Of course, logically speaking, that is the point where you should do it, right? Yeah, from a logical point of view, because that's when people are least prepared to defend themselves. They've let their guards down. They've stopped thinking in terms of their protection. They think that they don't have to defend themselves anymore. That's also at the point where the people become a greater threat to the people in power. So you see, you're going to get this kind of thing occurring. But you know, we got to think, what are we talking about here then? Afrocentric education. I hope you begin to see that we as African people have very different things to talk about than Europeans. You've got to have your children to yourself. You can't just hand them over to other people. You've heard me tell you, there's no such thing as standard education, equal education. You got to get rid of that. According to the report, 48% of young minority male offenders are in jail with 16% on misdemeanor probation. Contrarily, which is the way it's got to be, 48% of young white offenders are on misdemeanor probation, but only 18% are in jail. In fact, I had a student of mine the other evening, I think she worked for some kind of police agency or something, and she indicated that they had to undergo they had to provide a major explanation for the arrest of a white woman. So if you arrest a white woman, you better have a doggone good reason, you know, for doing so. Or else you were up the creek, you know. And of course, this reminds you of the thing with the Hasidics, of course. And you remember the confession of the policeman there. That if you came up to arrest the city, you had to call the supervisor and you know, and go through this whole thing, and chances are he wouldn't be arrested, and he'd be given a summons, and the summons would be thrown right there on the ground. Or that sitting in that precinct station is a rabbi, so that whenever anything goes on in that community, he's right there in the car, with the car, to mediate the circumstances. And not so that you don't see their people in the jail. This is power. You see, this is the result of power. And so on and on we go. But the major point that I'm getting at here then is, again, that we see the black male as at the at the very point of impact of this society. One other thing, this was the Amsterdam News, November 24th, 1990, about this debate on educating black male teens heat up. And it's amazing, you know, that we sit around and debate these issues so much. That's another thing when you become a nation within a nation. You don't seek the authority and permission of another people, you know, to do what needs to be done. Why do we need the permission of white people to decide what we need to teach our children? Have you thought about the absurdity of that? Yeah, that you had to ask another people, what may I teach my child? Yeah, this is a part of what this so-called debate is about. Our trying to get permission and authorization from another people to teach our children history, to teach our children the knowledge that they need to survive as people. And if we don't get it, we don't teach it. This is nonsense. This is pure nonsense. So now we'll get in a vapid debate with these people for the next 3 or 4 years or whatever, and then lead and come up to another inconsequential conclusion or checkmate. Their plight is underscored, talked about the black males, by a welter of grim statistics again. A black male teenager is 6 times as likely as a white male teenager to be a victim of homicide. A fourth of black males between the ages of 20 and 29 are in prison or on parole. The unemployment rate for black males between 18 and 26 living in the inner cities is over 50% and increasing daily. And we're going to come back a little bit to that in terms of manhood and the importance of work and labor in defining what it means to be a man. What happens then to a man's definition of himself as a man when there is no labor or productive work in which he is engaged? You see? And that's a direct connection between productivity, work and labor, and masculinity in the sense of manhood. So the unemployment is just not merely an absence of jobs, but for a people who want to defeat black manhood, this absence of job is a part of defeating that manhood and putting that manhood in doubt, particularly when black males have bought their definition of what it means to be a man, you see. And in 1989, 13.8% of black youths 16 to 24 were not enrolled in school and did not have a high school diploma. The majority of these youth were black males. Frank Spradley out there in Brooklyn, who some of you heard about, of course, was dealing with this issue. We are living in critical times, he says, and we need some radical measures to rescue our young black males. And they go on to talk about what he's doing in his school. I read these, of course, and I know you're very familiar with them, to emphasize the fact that the black male must be given special attention and focus because he is given a negative special attention and focus by the system of oppression under which he lives. And to ignore this special focus and special oppression is to endanger the very survival of our people. And therefore, black manhood must be examined because it is in the context of black manhood that the race itself will survive. This race cannot survive without the survival of the black male. Woman, you can't do it by yourself. It's not going to happen that way. Your enemy knows it. That's why he's chosen this black male to come after and to destroy is possible. And that's why he psyched some of the females out into thinking that they can live without it. When you're psyched into that kind of thing, you become an ally of oppression. And this is in part what Ali is trying to get at. How does the black woman in accepting uncritically the values and orientations of an oppressive system, in effect then becomes a part of the problem of the black male and not a part of the solution to the problem as such. And that has to be looked at. I know it gets at your feminine ego, but you gotta deal with it, because it's not about your ego. It's about the survival of a group. And we have to put all of our egos behind us, male and female, when it comes to the survival of the group. And we got to get out of defensive postures and all of this kind of stuff, because, you know, how it hurts our pride is not the point. But how do we survive as a people? So what do we have here? To a good extent, a good deal of the material I'll be talking about is from this book, Manhood in the Making. So if you want to check some of it out, Manhood in the Making by David Gilmour. Cultural Concepts of Masculinity. And some good pieces on African manhood culture and what that is about. And I think we should read some of this material. I tell my psychology majors that your education in psychology is not complete without a working knowledge of anthropology. We underestimate the wisdom of our ancient cultures and the wisdom of our so-called primitive cultures severely. Just because a philosophy or ideology occurs later in time does not mean that philosophy or ideology is an advance over older ones. I think if you really took time and read anthropological studies of African people, you'd be just so pleasantly surprised to see the wisdom contained in their ideological, and how complex the ideology is, and how they solve problems that we see as almost irresolvable today, and see the variety of solutions they provide for us. So we need to study those cultures. And even if they're written by white men, doesn't matter. There's a lot of stuff that slips through. There's a lot of stuff that's there that you can use. So don't let the idea that it's written by a white anthropologist, because I see some of us jump off on that, you know, it's written by white folk, you know. These people are blind to many things too. And even though they may have intentions and other things, even in their blindness, they supply you with information and knowledge they don't even know they're supplying you with. You see? So you can't go off on a reactionary trip now and assume simply because something is written by a white anthropology, just it's not of any value to you. Not at all. Not at all. You can find stuff of immense value in anthropological works. They may have used it to embarrass us or do things like that, but it doesn't mean that the material itself cannot be used to uplift at the same time. One of the reasons why I talk against so-called equal education is the fact that education is the result, to a great extent, of what the student brings to the educational process. That it is the result of the intentionality of the student. That it is intentionality that makes the difference in what you get from education, not what is stated in the classroom. You see, so that a black student and a white student sitting in the same classroom, one intending to rule the world and master the world and control the world, gets a very different bit of information, a very different orientation from the same information that is given to the black student. The idea that your children are getting the same education as a white child, when their motivations are different, their values are different, where they want to go and what they want to do with the knowledge of difference is a fallacy. You can't have equal education with people who have different intentionalities. You see, it's the intentionality. Whether you intend to be a slave, whether you intend to be a servant, a second banana, subordinated, whether your highest goal is to work for white men or work for yourself, those things have effects on your memory, they have effect on your perception, on your understanding what you're reading, and upon how you apply what you read and know. And therefore, being in the same classroom, hearing the same thing, even getting the same A's is not getting you the same education. There is more to education than the handing out of information. It's memorization and regurgitation. The student makes the difference in what happens to education. And that student coming from a culture makes that difference as well, you see. And so we have to look at that. So then it is not so much that the white man writes it. It's not that as much as what you intend to do with it, you see. And you'd be surprised when you come in with that Afrocentric intention, and you come in with the intention to be liberated, when you come in as a man and mean not to be bossed by any other doggone man on this earth, you're going to get a whole different set of information out of the material. I'm telling you. You see? But if you want to depend on being liked and accepted and all of that, you're going to be, you're going to be even shy to talk about it. I don't want to talk about them people. They don't wear clothes. Some other kind of nonsense. No, man, these people have sophisticated philosophies, and they can represent many solutions. So then, what are we talking about? Regardless of the normalities and distinctions made, society still distinguishes between male and female, man and woman, no matter how you play it. Despite all the unisexism and, feminism and so forth, a woman marries a man, and a woman wants a man. You're not running out here, women, looking for a unisex, are you? You're looking for a man, and a man looks for a woman. And no matter how you play it, and no matter how it works, and this is not to degrade female equality and so forth, but there is still a distinction between these two, people, these two groups here, male and female. And we have to deal with that, and it's going to be with us for quite some time yet. And societies, all of them have figured out some way of what is appropriate behavior to these two people of the species. No matter how you play it. You can cover it up any way you feel like it, but it's still there. And so manhood is something that is different from anatomy. And this is the thing you have to keep in mind about manhood. Manhood is a concept that must constantly be defined and restructured. You see, there must be a constant dialectic between men and women as to what a man is and as to what a woman is. It's key because you recognize the definition of what it means to be a man and a woman is the key to the adaptation and survival of people, of a people. It's not merely related to how you deal with each other in your own private home. It's related to the very survival of the race. And one thing you have to recognize about manhood, I think to a greater degree than womanhood, is that manhood is, on a certain level, is an artificial creation as such. In other words, there has to be something added. It is not enough for the man to come into the world with a penis. We don't just simply call a man simply because he has a penis and say, well, he's a male, therefore he's a man. Because you see, to act like a man, be a man. Of course, if a man and having penis were coterminous, you can say, well, I am a man, I got a penis, So what's the problem? No, but you hear even women say, act like a man, be a man. You see, there's something there that goes beyond the anatomy of maleness. There's something to be added on to. In fact, it becomes interesting when you look at the embryology of the human being, and look within the first 7 weeks of fetal development and recognize that in the human fetus, there are both organ systems present in the body. And see, nature is very economical, you see. In a way, it has only one body. And the basic body is female. you see, and it's basically, you might say, bisexual. And so it doesn't waste its time making two separate bodies. It takes one and decides to go one way with it or go the other way with it. So you get a body that comes in that has both sets of glands in it. The Müllerian female glands and the Wolffian male glands in the same body. And it will be the presence of the male gonad, if it's to be a genetic male, that's going to determine in which direction that body is going to go in terms of its internal development. If if the testicle is there or testes are there during these first 2 months, then the first 7 weeks. And the testes releases the appropriate hormones, one being, of course, the androgens, or the male hormone, another being what we call the Müllerian inhibiting hormone, because the Müllerian gland that's present in that bisexual body, if it were not inhibited by the male hormones, would then develop into parts of the female vagina, uterus, and the fallopian tubes. In fact, you get a hermaphroditic situation where this sometimes occurs, where sometimes the testicle operates only on one side of the body. So you may have then, in a sense, a half uterus and so forth on one side, with the male side on the other. The male gland then, the male hormones then inhibits the growth of the female side, and of course stimulates the development of the Wolffian glands, which develops into the vas deferens, the seminal vesicles, and the ejaculatory systems of the male, you see. So you can see here, in a sense, and now if a genetic male, for some reasons, if a genetic male's body is not responsive to the androgens, then even though the body is a genetic male body, the body will actually develop along the female route. In other words, it literally reverts or stays female in its basic design and configuration. In other words, then, you need to add something to get the male. If nothing is added, you get the female body. And this deals, of course, with the internal sexual organs and systems. When you look at the external sexual organs and systems, you will see then that the external organs too develop from one organ, the genital tubercle on the outside. Both the female clitoris and the male penis will develop from the same bud. Both the lips of the female vagina, major and minor, will develop from the same basic slit, and what becomes the female lips will, in the male, becomes the scrotum sac for the testes. And so you can see then nature taking the same basic body and, depending on the genetic program, using and transforming that body to suit the genetic program as such. But again, you see an adding on a plus in terms of the male. If that male body, again, genetic male body, is not responsive to the androgens and so forth, even though it is genetically designed to do so, you'll find a body that will stay basically female in its configuration. I'm going through that to indicate then that perhaps coincidentally, we kind of have this situation even on the sociological, psychological level, you see. Whereas we tend to accept the womanness or femaleness of a woman based on her biological apparatus, we tend not to be so quick to accept the maleness or the manness of a man based on his biological equivalent. He has to add something to it. In other words, then, manhood is a created product. It is made and developed. That is why in every society, you're going to find males at some point taking out for special treatment. Not that females are not, but I'm speaking here of treatment, because in this culture, you see, we got a lot of people getting upset because when we're talking about educating the black males, the very idea that at some point they will be separate from black females frightens a lot of folk. I don't know why. If you talk about African tradition, you should be used to that concept. The black males being separated from black females for years at a time. I'll talk in a minute here about the Samburu. The black males stay separated from the females essentially for 12 years during their education. The Maasai, a similar separation in pace and time, and you can go from one African tribe and group to the other. The African male is separated so that he can be taught the appropriate behavior to the survival of the group and the society, and taught how to relate to women. You see, we'll come back to that in a second too. One of the major problems with this society is that men and women are not prepared to live with each other. You send your children to school, they learn math, and they learn science, and they learn all this other stuff, and they learn everything but the very basic things that makes people happy. How to live one with the other. How to be happy one with the other. No courses in family. No courses on what it means to be a husband, or what it means to be a wife. No courses on how do you get along and resolve problems and issues within your family. No courses in terms of community relations and practice in community relations. And then you wonder why the society is so disorganized and destroyed, you see. But the older systems had the wisdom. They knew that you just couldn't throw men and women together without any training, without any preparation, and say, good luck, you see. And yet here this so-called advanced society will teach everything but what it takes for people to live together. Advanced. This is regression. That's why the divorce rate is so bad. The family situation is the way it is, and so forth. You must prepare men to live with women. And sometimes the best preparation requires that they be separated for a while so you can have some honest conversation and deal with each other in honesty. You know, men and women are like white folk and black folk. You can see the whole psychology of black people change when white folk come into the room. They get uptight, they get embarrassed, you know, we don't want to put the laundry out, you know, the whole thing. We want to look the best. You know, I was looking at this, speaking of Shahrazad Ali show there, this woman stood up, this black woman, during the show, and said, you know, something like, black folk, y'all act nice. Now remember, white America is watching. You know, let's be on our best behavior, you know. So we can't have an honest discussion or, you know, deep discussion because white folk are watching. And this often happens, of course, when you have men around women at certain points. You know, we gotta maintain our masculine ego. You know, we gotta, so it's difficult often for us to be honest and relate to each other honestly and deal with some issues because we are defensive about our image in front of women, as we need be, and vice versa. So in order to engage in an honest education of the male, there are times when males need to be together and deal with each other straightforwardly. And men do the best job of making men. Yes, and this has to be dealt with. Just as women do the best one with making women, ladies and gentlemen. And at some point, the boy is made into a man by men. And we have to bring that back into our equation if we are to survive as people. So manhood is not a given. It must be developed. And the development of the manhood ideal is not just a chauvinistic idea. The development of the manhood ideal has to be imposed on men. And men have to conform to that ideal whether they like it or not. Yeah, that's a part of it. You see, I mentioned here, I think a couple of lectures back, when I say, you know, we talk about man being warlike. A lot of people say, you know, man is aggressive, he's warlike, and so forth. And we have to remind you that most men are not naturally warlike. You see, you have to draft them into the army. Yeah, you have to make them go to war. They just don't run to the army. If they ran to the army, you wouldn't have to draft them. You know? Most men under combat don't even fight. Many soldiers under combat don't even fire. They have special officers who hang in the back to run the men back up to the lines. Yeah, contrary to all your myths and all this other stuff, because we like to create that all of us are brave. All of us are ready to give our lives. Come on. Doesn't happen that way. You see some of the old-time armies, literally the men were beaten into battle. Yeah. In other words, a good officer knows that you have got to be more frightened of him than you are of the enemy. That's right, because if you weren't, you run over him and run back in the back when the time got on. Yes. In other words, then, and most men would like to be home with their wives and their families and around the farm and the whole bit, rather than out in the cold and starving and doing all the things men have to do. Because war is not a pretty game. It may be made to look good, when Stallone is, spraying bullets all over the place. And that's what, of course, gets a lot of American people in a lot of trouble, looking at these stupid movies. I'm going to kill them all, That ain't the way it works out. War is hell. It's disgusting. People get hurt. People get killed. People get maimed. People get brutalized. People are used and abused and destroyed. Not only the soldier himself, his family and the community and other things are destroyed. War is not a playtime activity. And most men, if they could avoid it, don't want to go in it. So, yet, the nation must be what? Defended. The race must be saved. The children must be fed. The wives must be protected. And sometimes that requires what? War. That requires the ability for a man to defend his race, his family, his children. Sometimes it requires stealing. Yeah, that's what it's about. Because to a great extent, that's what war is about. Taking away from somebody what they have. We glorify it, don't we? We make it a big deal. It's not the big deal, it seems. Of course, again, we're deceived by words, aren't we? You see, the white man deceives his thievery behind the word what? War. He deceives the fact that he runs the greatest mafia operation in the world behind the words national interest. You see? And a lot of us are caught up with the words. And he deceives the fact that South America and Central America is his territory, the United States territory, and it's our territory, and we have the right to exploit it any way we feel like it. And the Russians and everybody else better what? Stay out. And if you try to get in our special territory, and never mind what the people have to say about it. They don't have a damn thing to say about it. It doesn't matter what the Central Americans out there. It doesn't matter that the Nicaraguans want to, elect the Sandinistas, or that the Chileans wanted to put Allende in office, or that the Grenadians wanted to put, in the office. No, this is our territory. The people have nothing to say. How different is that then from the crack dealer who says, South Queens, this is what? Our territory, and everybody else stays out. And the people say, we don't want any of you in there. Shut up, you ain't got nothing to say about it. And if you object, we're going to do what? Get you. But you see, we're willing to see the criminality there and the gangsterism there. But we don't see the criminality and gangsterism, you see, in this country saying Central and South America is what? Our sphere of influence. What do you mean sphere of influence? You see? And we collect from this group of people. And we make them pay what? Protection. And those people who don't agree with what we are doing, we're going to put an insurrectionary army in there and destroy them. Or as in Panama, we'll go in and do it ourselves. And this is what it's about. And what do they mean by national interests? Or like as what's his name says, Bush, our way of what? Life. the life to which we have become what? Accustomed, which requires that we stay as subordinated people. And he's letting then Saddam Hussein know that we're used to living it up, man. Having more than we can eat. You know, just consuming all the world's resources and so forth. But I be damned if we're going to let you have control of your own resources, man. No way. We're not going to do it. And we're going to have to fight you to do it. And on a certain basic level, this is in part what manhood and peoplehood is about. Are the people to voluntarily starve and die? Or are the men to go out and get what is needed for the survival of their people? Or are we going to let another people come in and take everything we have so that our children can starve and die? Or are the men going to stand up and defend what they have? This is part of what manhood is about, you understand? And this is why the man has to be especially psyched up and indoctrinated and trained. This is why manhood is not a mere chauvinistic definition. It is a social definition. It is supremely related to the people and to the survival of a people. It is not merely a haughty game that men play. In fact, it's a game that many men wish they didn't have to play. But they recognize that they must play it. Because a part of manhood also is a sense of duty. And a part of manhood is the willingness to sacrifice oneself in the interest of one's people and in the interest of one's folk. And that requires the stamina and the skill and the commitment and the duty and the willingness to put up with a lot of nonsense and hardship and so forth to see that that is the case. And that requires then the training of boys, and they have no choice about it. They must be set up and trained to do it, because they not only live for themselves, they must live for the race and live for the group. Because without the race and without the group, there is no self. And this requires certain disciplines, then, you see. Now, one of the ones I recommend that you read about here is the Sambaru that Gilmore talks about here. And their image of what it means to be a man, to be a worthy man, you see. With the heavy emphasis on economic self-sufficiency and productivity. You have to recognize that in the older systems, the definition of manhood was tied up with productivity. With this Sambaru, a man is a man that owns something, that is not working for another man. That's the ideal. As I ask many of our young men today, how can you accept the definition that a man means to be independent and then see the ultimate goal of your life as working for a white man? It's a contradiction. It's a contradiction. You cannot see that as the end point of your life if you define manhood in terms of independence. If you define manhood in terms of what? Self-control, self-determination. You can't do it. And then fall subject to the white man. That's why the very definition of yourself as a man requires the overthrow of the white man in this world today. You cannot be a full man and be subject to rulership by white men. That's a contradiction in terms. That's why you got to move the black boy beyond going to school just for jobs. He's going to school to remove this white man as his boss. You understand? That's right. One of the major reasons why your children suffer in these schools is because we do not have transcendent goals. Goals that move beyond the individual's own desires and wishes. Understand? Education is a transcendent goal. It transcends the individual in that education is concerned ultimately with this ability of a people to survive and a transmitting to the next generation of what it takes to survive. You see? And therefore, the education of the individual just does not stop with themselves. It moves beyond the self. But when you make the end point of the education of your children merely jobs, then it becomes very difficult for you to motivate the child and understand why that child is really going to school, because it doesn't move beyond this. And of course, you see, the system likes to keep us at this point. There must be a transcendent reason that we're here. To own property. Now, this group of people, the Samburu, depend on cattle for their wealth. In fact, cattle is wealth. Goats, a few donkeys, and so forth, but mainly cattle. It's liquid capital. It is the basis of their prestige, the basis of their influence. And so, therefore, to be called a worthy elder or worthy man is to own and control one's own piece of land, or to control one's own herd, and to be no one's servant. This is the ideal of manhood for this group. This may involve then their having to rustle that cattle from some other people, because a young boy has got to establish himself as a man. That may involve taking back from other people. I know that hurts some of our moral sensitivities. But if it does hurt your moral sensitivity, remember where you got your morality from. Yeah. And who taught you your morality? You know, we don't look at that enough, and I have to remind people again and again that African people did not come into this country as Christians. Yeah. That's a very important point, as embarrassed as you want to be about a Christian, but you got to face it. Africans did not come in here worshiping Jesus. They came in with their own religions and backgrounds. Now, am I attacking your worship of Jesus? I'm not doing that. Keep Jesus, love him, he's real to you. I'm not dealing with that. Okay, because that's not the point of where I'm going at here. You see, the point that I'm trying to get at here is that you may not be worshiping Jesus for the same reason you were taught to worship Jesus. Okay, those are two different things. You understand what I'm trying to get at? In other words, you may be converted by a hypocritical preacher, a shyster minister, and come truly to believe in the reality of Jesus. I'm not questioning your belief in the reality of Jesus, but your belief in the reality of Jesus does not mean that shyster preacher is still not using your belief in the reality of Jesus to further his hypocritical program. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, he can take advantage of your innocent and pure belief to rook you, to exploit you, and to use you for your own purposes. That is why you have to go even beyond the pure belief in the reality of your God. Also, you have to also look at how is this so-called reality presented and for what reason it was presented. And when you must then ask the question, why did the white man teach the black man Christianity? What did he have to gain from that teaching? And you can believe me, if he thought teaching black people about Christ would defeat his dominance, he would not have taught you. You have to understand that. It's very important. And one of the reasons why he taught you this is so as soon as we talk about taking from him what he has taken from us, his morality pops up. Thou shalt not steal. You know? And so any taking from him, no matter the fact that he took it from you in the first place, you got to feel unentitled to what has already been taken from you. And a part of his moral teaching was to get you just in that state of mind, so that you can't bring it upon yourself to take back what belongs to you. So that you can do two things. You cannot fight to get back what is yours. You can only fight for the exploiter, as we are doing right over there in Saudi Arabia today. How many of those men over there and women can we get to turn the guns against the people who most abuse them? The moral system would jump right up and say, no, you can't do it. We see this kind of game going on. So then, if their wealth depends on cattle, they are taught how to rustle cattle. They are taught how to be brave. They must. They are given then initiation rites, which to many of us would appear to be cruel. Here are boys that are trained for manhood beginning around the age 12 or 10, a little earlier. And they're going to be in this training for about 12 years. And the first part of this training involves circumcision without anesthesia. And you can imagine what a 12, 14-year-old boy is going to feel when you are circumcising him. And he is told, if you twitch one muscle and make one cry, you will not be granted the title of man. In fact, we're going to ostracize you, and your whole family is ostracized and knocked out. And it's not only done by this group, but many other groups. And he must, and his male relatives are sitting right there looking at him. And the other people are looking at him and watching. And any flinching and movement is called to run. And he's lost. He can't continue from that point. He's out of the running right at that point. Cruel? Yes, on a certain level, perhaps we will say. But on another level, here's a man that's got to learn to live with what? Pain. He's got to learn not to be overcome by the fear of what? Pain. You see. He's got to learn how to face death and not what? Run. So it's not just a silly, primal, primitive ritual. It is deeply embedded into the very economic, political, and social life of the people themselves. And the boys then have to be trained to undertake this kind of life. In a world where there's great scarcity and where things must be achieved through competition, the male must be trained to compete. He must be trained to take risks because the life of the community, what? Depends on it. It's not just a game of male chauvinism. He must then, in a life, and we are in a competitive system, aren't we? We hear this all the time, don't we? A competitive system. How then are we going to live in a competitive system if we do not train our men to be what? Competitive. And to be competitive means to take risks, sometimes enormous risks. To be competitive means often to be able to withstand pain and to withstand the fear that threatens to overwhelm you. Being competitive means being enduring, persistent. And see, one of the problems you're going to find in many of our black children in school, that one of the things that defines their character is what we call the lack of persistence. The inability to stick with a problem and to stick with a lesson and so forth until they master that lesson. To fall easily to frustration. But in order for us to be ruled, we must have children who give up at the first moment of frustration. Or men who must quit as soon as they run into rough territory. But the other men who want to rule must make it what? Rough. They got to. Or else they can't protect what they have. And so in order for you to take what they have from them, since it is a society of taking, you got to learn how to deal with what? The roughness. And this is what this thing is about. It's interesting to note that when you look at the black politicians, you hear this word, non-threatening politician. That's one of those new terms, right? Non-threatening. In other words, we will elect Negro politicians who don't threaten white folk and frighten white folk. So Dinkins and Wilder and Rice and and they got a guy here elected here, conservative, up there in Connecticut somewhere, Republican or something, right? Andrew Young, they're talking about the non-threatening black politician. Isn't that interesting? Non-threatening. And you know what that means. And what I quoted to you a while ago is a result of non-threatening. black politicians and judges, black men and black people being destroyed. A man must be threatening, particularly to his enemies. If you don't frighten the enemies of the race, then the enemies are going to come in and take advantage of the race. And he must learn then to display his capacity to defend to the death his group and his principles and his people, and if possible to frighten away his rivals and to frighten away those who threaten him. So anytime you get a group talking about electing non-threatening, black men, you're getting a group that's getting ready to be raped and taken. And that's one of the reasons why we have this parallelism between black men going to jail and the kind of problem we have and the election of non-threatening black politicians. Because no one is afraid to mess with their people and to deal with their people. So then we see then in the image of the Sambaru man that he is not only hard and is not only steadfast in terms of his own definition of manhood, but his steadfastness is an economical phenomenon as well, you see. Because in that manhood definition is productivity. In order to be a man, you must grow more cattle. You see, in order to be a man, you must conquer more territory and build yourself a farm or a ranch or this or that. Now, this is not only a building for that man as an individual. That is a building for whom? For his family, for his group, you see. So his role of manhood not only then is a chauvinistic definition of self, it is an economic, productive definition of self. Now, what would happen if we as black men would say, in order to be a man, we must own the economic systems of our neighborhood? That I don't feel like we are full men when we let Korean men, Arab men, and all of these white men and other people stay in the midst of our people and take the wealth of our people. How can we look ourselves in the eye and say that we are men? That's why, yes, exactly my point. Turn right around, that's why you're getting people knocking women around and doing a lot of the things and knocking each other around. Because when you're afraid to face your enemy and deal with your enemy and define your manhood as a defeat of your enemy, then you're thrown back on yourself. And a great deal of black-on-black violence, whether it's black men against black men, or black men against white men, or black men against women, or black men against themselves in terms of destructive habits, such as addictions, it is a result of what? People who have surrendered to a certain cowardice and who have given up the thought that they can overthrow the white man and his rule, and have permitted themselves to fall in a state of despair and fear, and therefore now seek to soothe their despair and hurt masculine pride by then getting inebriated and high and finishing themselves off for the enemy, or overcompensating and destroying women and children in the same way, you see. So I hope you can begin to see that manhood involves much more than chauvinism, ladies and gentlemen. Am I able to get through here? Now, not only then, in order for the Sambaru to be a man, he must engage in self-denial. And that's a part of the deal too. One of the things the Sambaru boy does, at a certain point, he stands before his mother's and the women quarters and swears that from this point on, he will not eat any food seen by the married women. What is he saying here? He's not going to eat any more of his mother's food. He's not going to eat any more of the food given by women. That means he hates women? Not at all. He's saying now, I'm getting ready to move from the position of consumer and taker into the position of what? Producer. You see? And no matter how tempting the food is, and no matter how, wonderful it is, and some of this food is their natural food and the food that they love very much, I'm going to deny myself this until I achieve the ability and the capacity to make it for myself, and now to feed my mother, other than being what? Fed by her. A whole different reversal. And that is a part of the manhood ritual. To move a boy who is a sucker of milk and eating at mother's breast and so forth, to move him into the role as producer. You see, we used to have that in our society too in the old days. And you used to hear a guy when he was young say, man, the first thing I'm going to do when I start making money is buy my mama a house. You don't hear that much anymore, do you? And I'm going to set my mama up, and I'm going to make her stop working, and the whole deal. We don't hear that, but I'm going to mama and see if I get something to eat. A whole different ethos going on here. And yet, he is an American, Different thing. A part of that ceremony of the Samburu and of the Maasai is that the boy cannot be a man until he kills his first oxen. And then he cuts that oxen and gives the biggest piece to his mother, you see. And what is he symbolizing again? I am now what? The producer and the provider. So as I shall show you later, you see, manhood, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, is a nurturing definition. Men are nurturers and givers to their society. It is only in this deteriorated definition of what it means to be a man, and only when we have let this oppression separate us from our tradition, that our men continue to be consumers and takers. It is only the absence of the knowledge of our culture that has permitted us to deteriorate to the point where we are today, you see, and taking in uncritically feminist philosophy to the point where we doubt and we're ashamed to say that we are men. You see, we got to get out of that. His worthiness comes not only from accumulating, and note this thing about the manhood here that's prevalent throughout many African systems. His worthiness comes not only from accumulating, but from lavish gifting during feasts. Manhood or masculinity is a kind of moral, invisible hand that guides the activities of self-respecting individuals toward the collective end of capital accumulation. What do we mean here? In other words, if you really want to be a big man, after you accumulate this property and the cattle and so forth, what do? You give it back. You give a big feast. You just feed people, you see. And the more you feed, and one of the things you really do is you be the one who eat the least at your feast. And the more you're able to make people eat more, and the less you eat, the more of a man you are, you see. And this is why you teach these boys, they're not going to eat until they kill their own cattle. And if they starve, so be it. What can I tell you? Because we can't afford you. You see, you demonstrate then your ability as a producer, you see. You demonstrate your ability to enter into self-denial, not because it, quote unquote, just makes you a man, but in making you a man, you feed the nation and you feed the people. This black man, you see, has been duped by this religion into hating money and hating wealth. And I try to tell black people, we are wealth-producing people. Where do we get this thing here of identifying with poverty? Where do we get this craziness of seeing poorness and goodness as the same thing? And seeing virtue in poverty? We have to get it from the other people. It doesn't make any sense. There's no greatness in being poor and poverty-stricken. In fact, there's great sin that flows out of poverty. Yeah. Look who hits you over the head. Rich folk? Are they the ones mugging you out here? No, poverty is not automatically virtue. But of course, you see, the other people, in order to rob us and keep us poor, makes us associate virtue and poverty, you see. And somehow we are not supposed to make money. You got a bunch of jokers around here, yeah, black people are not good accountants. Give it to the Jews. They know what to do with money. How the hell the Jews can out-count money more than you? Money is money. That's all. The Jew doesn't have any greater facility with money than you have. But I told you here some lectures ago, right, that the white man is no better manager of business than we are. What is his advantage? He only makes you what? Pay for his mistakes. Do you remember when I told you that? Back some time ago? Hasn't the S&L crisis shown you that? White man mismanaging the economy, destroying the systems, destroying the banks. Are they in jail? Are they paying back? No, we're going to pay for that. We're going to pay for that. But yet we have this myth, that they are better managers of business, that they are this and they are that, because we don't take time to see, because we have not received an African-centered education that can permit us to look through this nonsense and see what is right in front of our eyes. And we see the mismanagement of the economy all the time. Total mismanagement. Screwing up. But what happens? Well, we screwed it up this time. We're sorry, we got to put you off the job. Yeah, we got to furlough you. We got to make you pay more taxes. This is the game. This is what the game is about. No calling into question the leadership of the white male as a business person or financial person at all. In fact, we think he's even great now that he sits up and outlines how many jobs must be lost in the city and how many departments, he talks percentages and so forth, not realizing he's covering up his what? His failures. Oh, but isn't he magnificent, the way he lays out how many folk got to be fired and destroyed. Wow, I wonder if a black man could do that. Craziness. But that's the result of power. You make other people pay for your mistakes. And that's the result of weakness. You pay for the mistakes of others. And that's the way the game is set up. That's the reality of life, ladies and gentlemen. It's not pretty, but that's what it's about. That's why a man doesn't worry about being what? Pretty. He has to deal with the realities and the harsh realities that exist out here. And those realities are not beautiful. And therefore, he doesn't spend all his time primping and going through all of the changes, because his duty lies elsewhere. And he doesn't get his way in the world through seduction and through the other game. He gets his way in the world through what? Power. Power and strength. The black man has been feminized by the white man. Yeah, very much so. Integrationism is a feminist orientation. Let us marry the white man. Let us and the white man be as one. And once he sees that I'm his brother, that we are the same, there's no difference between us, even though we're black or 7 midnights. You can't see the difference. You can't see the difference, You're not supposed to see that. And of course, being one, he will now give all of his, share his wealth. That's the craziness that animates the assimilationist idea. Oh, don't worry about building a system yourself. Don't worry about constructing an economic system, a political system, and so forth. No, just marry the white man and you got it. It comes with the whole time. Don't worry about having to fight and struggle to the death with this other person. Just marry them. Get them to like you. Get them to love you. Get them to see you as one with themselves, and you got it made. So then when you get that attitude, all you got to do is make yourself likable. You see? And you seduce them. You make them feel guilty. Ain't you sorry what you did to us? We get into that. Oh, look at all this slavery you put us through. We're weak and broken. Don't you feel sorry? Give us something for it. Yeah. Yeah. It ain't gonna work that way. Another thing for you Christian folk, and the other ones. We're not being prejudiced here. And the other ones. But there's a telling illustration of when the rich man comes to Jesus and says, "What must I do to be saved?" Jesus says, "Give all that money you stole back." And it's interesting what that paradigm represents, right? Now, those of us who are Christian, of course, see Jesus as God. Jesus is a God, right? Yeah, God. Isn't it interesting that this human being comes to God, looks God in the face, and when God tells him what to do, he says what? Screw you. Did he give his wealth back? No, he didn't. He went right on about his business. And then what did God say? It's as easy for a rich man to get into heaven as a camel to get through the agony. But the guy was still gone with the money. Okay. Now what am I saying to you then? If a rich man can look God in the face and say, "I ain't giving it back," what the hell you think he's going to tell you? Yeah. So you think through some guile and nonsense, you're going to rook this white man into giving you his wealth. You're out of your minds. I'm telling you. Through some moral suasion. This man, are you kidding? That's not the way it works in real life, ladies and gentlemen. Men defy God. And if they defy God, they sure as heck gonna defy you. And if we're sitting around one day waiting for this white man to reach some kind of moral sainthood and share this wealth, you're gonna be waiting forever. It's not gonna happen. It's not gonna go that way. Read your Bible carefully. Move beyond what the preacher tells you sometimes. You know, you've heard me with the Moses thing. Same thing with Moses. God promised him the land. Gets right there at the promised land. The God give him the key. Say, "Here, Moses, unlock the gate and go right on in. I promised it to you." Didn't do it. You go over there and do intelligence in that country. See how it's laid out and so forth. See where the army is. See how the cities are organized. Why are you going to do that? Because you're going to have to do what? Take it. Take it by war. Even though I have what? Promised it to you. You understand what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen? Simply because something is promised doesn't mean you don't have to fight for it. And you see it in that Moses story. I promised you the land, and yet I'm not going to give it to you. You're going to have to fight for it. And you're familiar with how they were psyched out over there. "Oh, we can't beat them. They're giants. They're invincible. Oh, we were better off under slavery. Take us back to Egypt." You know, they nearly hung Moses that night. Yeah. You know it. Screaming and hollering. Read the verse. They were screaming and hollering in the night. What can we do? What happened? And the ones that were psyched out were condemned to die. They had to stay in the wilderness, stay in confusion, stay in madness, and die. And only those who believed the impossible and thought the impossible, that he is not invincible. The white man. You must understand this. The white man can be defeated, and defeated by black men. You understand? If you don't believe it, you're going to die in these gutters with crack up your nostrils, which is what's happening to a lot of us already. Those who've given up. Those who are afraid they can't change the world. Those who have not dared to challenge and put their lives on the line. But they end up dying anyway. Miserable, cowardly deaths. And not only do they end up dying themselves, which we wouldn't mind so much, they take a whole lot of other people with them and destroy a whole lot of other potential who can move us forward as a people, you see. Because they bought the idea that the man is invincible and that they cannot overcome him. And now they die in the wilderness of North America, around the world. Time. Okay, we're going to have to bring it here, but we have to understand then manhood and its relationship. So manhood is also related to generosity. In order for a man to be generous, he must accumulate. He must have something to give away. He must be trained then to get things. You see, he cannot be trained to be a dependent. He must be trained toward independence. When you see my book on the education of black children, you're going to see a whole list of cognitive styles that I'm going to talk about that have been made to characterize black children, and which is one of the reasons, which are some of the reasons why they have so much trouble in this educational system. You must understand that the imperialist mind operates on a very different set of values than the subjective mind, you see. And part of the major reasons we have problems in this school, we are in schools designed by imperialists for imperialists, and we are subject people in them. And we cannot fathom the kind of thinking that is projected in those schools. We cannot fathom why they teach what they teach, why they teach it the way they teach it, because we don't see in any way it being related to where we are and where we want to go. It isn't. It isn't. Those schools are designed to maintain their dominance, and that dominance must be maintained by particular ways of thinking, by particular ways of relating to each other, by particular ways of seeing the world, ladies and gentlemen. Now, unless you intend to be an imperialist yourself, or remove imperialists, the thought styles and approaches they are teaching in these schools make no sense. And you have difficulty what? Learning them and developing them. And that's the major part about, well, why am I learning mathematics? Well, why should I learn, to understand English very well? You see. Because you don't see it, no. If you don't see the power of the word and how the word is used, how the word is used in thinking, how the word is used by others, so that you can discern deception from truth and so forth. You see, that's why you're learning this. Not because you're trying to be like white folk. That's the last person you want to be like, and not simply because you're trying to get a job, but because it is a part of your very capacity to defend yourself. If you can't understand intent behind the word, motivation behind the word, how a word is being used to manipulate consciousness and so forth, you will be victimized by those words. So you learn English, standard English and the other stuff as a way of self-defense and as a way of moving oneself out from under domination. This is what it's about, you see. And you will see then that this imperialist mind is represented in the very structure of the schools themselves, all the way through. And they are represented in the very thought styles of the white middle class, in contrast even to the black middle class, and in particular to the black lower socioeconomic class. And so you get these differentiations, one being analytical thinking, the other one being relational thinking. I don't have time to explain these today. And and you'll see one succeeds in school, the other one drops out. These people got it all figured out. Look in Hale Benson's book about the black child, and look at how they show the analytical thinker with high IQ, high success in school, so forth, the analytical thinker, high information and so forth, success. The relational thinker, high information, trouble in school. The relational thinker, low information, dropout, behavior problems, the whole thing. And yet, if you look at the nature of domination, you will see that that very thought style is inculcated by the very structure and nature of domination itself. And you'll see how it's built in. That's why you got to be conscious of it, or else you'll identify it with Negro culture. That's the way we think. We're intuitive. Yes, we're intuitive, but we are more than intuitive. We are intuitive plus. You see, we are spiritual. Yes, we are spiritual, but we are also analytical. You know, some of us want to back off in there. Well, you know, to be African is to be spiritual, to be intuitive, to be emotional, to be... Come on now, you got more than that in your head. And you have to use both of them for survival. And you have to learn which side is appropriate under various circumstances. You see, and you can't hide behind African intuitiveness while you're being destroyed. If it's necessary for us to learn how to think analytically and so forth, we must learn that style of thinking. Does it mean giving up the African intuition? Not at all. It means adding it on to African intuition and becoming more powerful than all the other one-sided people in the world. You see, a combining, you see, and a developing into a bimodal, both sides of the head kind of person, as against the one-sided white man and the one-sided other man there. You see, and this is what it's about. We don't reject, but you'll see these styles are built right in. Impulsive style against the reflective style. One that takes time and thinks, and the other one that just gives you the first answer that comes into the head. You got to be that way. But a part of manhood training, a major part of manhood is self-mastery. Yeah, that's one reason why he's going to take that cut and stand up to it. Master your pain. Master the overwhelming desire to run. Master the overwhelming desire to scream. You see, control it. Because if you are an impulsive type, you can't control your feelings. You're going to rape and rob your own people. You're going to consume your own people's productions and so forth. You're not going to take time to think out strategy so you can defend your people and defend your family and so forth, you see. You're going to then take in drugs because you're so impulsive. You don't take time to think. There's a direct connection between impulsive orientations and drug addictions. You see, what is culture? Culture is not merely a knowledge of song and dance and a knowledge of, you know, the way we dress and behave. That's very superficial. Culture is a way of thinking. It is an intellectual system.